The staff room was louder than usual that Monday afternoon. Papers were spread across the long table, coffee cups sat half empty, and everyone was talking at the same time. The annual cultural evening was only 2 weeks away, and many last-minute problems were starting to appear. In the corner of the room, a quiet woman sat with a small notebook in her hands. She was a temporary teacher who had joined the school only 3 months earlier. She mostly handled extra classes and helped when someone was absent. She dressed simply, always in soft colors. Her voice was gentle, and she never interrupted anyone. Most people in the school barely noticed her unless they needed help covering a class. That day, she listened carefully while the music teacher spoke in a worried tone. "Our main pianist just called," the music teacher said. "He cannot perform at the event anymore. His family has an emergency. We don't have anyone else who can play that piece." The room fell quiet for a moment. The piano performance was supposed to be the highlight of the evening. Parents from the whole town would attend. The principal had already invited special guests. Someone flipped through a stack of teacher application forms. "Didn't she mention piano?" one teacher asked, glancing toward the quiet woman in the corner. Several heads turned at once. The quiet woman looked up, slightly confused. "Me?" she asked softly. "Yes," another teacher said. "I remember reading that you listed piano under your hobbies." She gave a small, shy smile. "I play a little," she answered. "Just for myself." The music teacher leaned forward. "How much is a little?" She hesitated. "I learned when I was young. It has been many years since I performed in front of people." The room filled with whispers. Some teachers looked hopeful. Others looked doubtful. "We don't need a professional concert," one teacher said quickly. "We just need someone who can get through the piece." The music teacher pulled out the sheet music from a folder and placed it on the table. "This is not simple," he warned. "It has fast runs and difficult timing. It requires strong control." The quiet woman looked at the pages from across the room. Even from a distance, the notes were familiar to her. Her heart beat a little faster, but her face remained calm. "I can try," she said gently. "Try?" someone repeated. "We don't have time for trying. We need certainty." A few teachers exchanged looks. There was pressure in the air. The principal folded his hands on the table. "We don't have another option," he said firmly. "If she has some experience, we should give her a chance." The quiet woman felt many eyes on her. She did not like attention. She preferred standing at the back of classrooms, helping students quietly. Being on a stage was something she had avoided for years, but the way everyone was looking at her made it hard to refuse. "If it helps the school, I will do my best," she said. The music teacher handed her the sheets. "Rehearsal starts tomorrow after school," he said. "We'll see how it goes." After the meeting ended, the room slowly emptied. 2 teachers stayed behind, speaking in low voices. "Do you really think she can handle that piece?" one asked. "She doesn't seem the type," the other replied. "She is too quiet. That composition needs power." They did not notice that she was still by the door, putting her notebook into her bag. She heard every word, but she said nothing. Outside, the afternoon sky was pale and cloudy. She walked home instead of taking the bus, as she often did. The walk gave her time to think. In her small apartment, there stood an old upright piano near the window. It had scratches on the wood and slightly faded keys. It was not grand or beautiful, but it meant everything to her. She placed the sheet music carefully on the stand. For a moment, she just looked at it. The notes brought back memories she had kept locked away. She sat down slowly and rested her fingers on the keys. The room was silent except for the ticking of a small clock on the wall. Then she began. The first notes were soft, almost testing. But within seconds, her fingers moved with confidence. The fast passages flowed like water. Her hands crossed smoothly. The difficult timing felt natural. The small room filled with music that did not match the simple apartment. It was strong, emotional, full of life. She closed her eyes as she played. For those minutes, she was not a temporary teacher. She was not the quiet woman people overlooked. She was someone else, someone powerful and certain. When the last note faded, she opened her eyes slowly. A deep breath escaped her lips. She had not played this piece in years. Yet her hands remembered every movement. The next afternoon, she entered the school auditorium for rehearsal. The large stage lights were off, but even in the dim room, the grand piano stood proudly at the center. The music teacher waited near the front row with folded arms. "You can start whenever you're ready," he said. She walked toward the piano calmly, though her heart was beating faster than usual. She adjusted the bench slightly and placed the sheet music in front of her. A few teachers had come to watch. Some sat with crossed arms. Others whispered quietly. She pressed the first key. The sound was clear and rich, very different from her old piano at home. As she continued, the auditorium slowly grew silent. The teachers who had been whispering stopped mid-sentence. The difficult sections arrived, but her fingers did not hesitate. Each note landed with precision. The rhythm was steady. The emotion built naturally. The music teacher's expression changed from doubt to surprise. He stepped closer without realizing it. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for several seconds. One teacher began but could not finish the sentence. The music teacher cleared his throat. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She gave a small smile. "I had good teachers when I was young." "You said you play a little," another teacher said. She lowered her eyes slightly. "It has been some time since I played for anyone." The principal, who had quietly entered the back of the hall, stepped forward. "You will perform at the event," he said firmly. "There is no question now." The quiet woman nodded. As she walked back to the staff room, the whispers had changed. They were no longer doubtful. They were curious. Still, she felt something heavy in her chest. Performing again meant stepping into a part of her life she had left behind. It meant standing in front of people, being seen, being judged. That evening at home, she practiced again. Not because she needed to learn the notes, but because she needed to prepare her heart. The closer the event came, the more the school buzzed with excitement. Students decorated the hall. Posters were hung on the walls. Parents talked about the big piano performance. Some teachers now proudly mentioned that their own colleague would play. But she remained the same, soft-spoken, humble, moving quietly through the halls. On the outside, nothing about her seemed grand. Inside, however, something long silent had begun to wake up. And no one in that school truly understood who they had just asked to sit at that piano. The days after the first rehearsal felt different inside the school. Word had quietly spread that the temporary teacher could play far better than anyone expected. Still, not everyone was convinced. Some believed she had simply practiced that one piece before coming. Others wondered if she would lose confidence on the actual night of the event. In the staff room, conversations often paused when she entered. Smiles were polite, but curious eyes followed her. A few teachers began asking careful questions. "How long have you been playing?" one asked while stirring tea. "Since childhood," she replied gently. "Did you ever perform seriously?" another asked. She folded her hands together. "I studied for some years," she said. Life became busy later. Her answers were always short. She never spoke about details. That mystery made people even more curious. Meanwhile, the music teacher decided to increase rehearsal time. "The audience will expect perfection," he said one afternoon. "We cannot take risks." She nodded. She understood the pressure, even if others thought she did not. During the next rehearsal in the auditorium, a few senior teachers sat in the front row with notebooks, almost as if they were judges. The atmosphere felt heavier than before. "You can start from the middle section," the music teacher suggested. "The fast movement." She adjusted her posture and began playing from the most difficult passage. Her fingers moved quickly, but her face remained calm. The rhythm stayed steady, even through the complicated turns. One teacher whispered to another, "She doesn't look nervous at all." "She will be," the other replied. "Wait until the hall is full." When she finished, the music teacher asked her to repeat certain parts again and again. Not because she made mistakes, but because he wanted to be sure. Each time, she played with the same control. Still, small doubts remained in some hearts. People often judge what they do not understand. After rehearsal, she walked back to her classroom to collect her bag. A group of students stood near the door. "Miss, is it true you are playing at the big event?" one asked with wide eyes. "Yes," she answered softly. "Will it be very hard?" another asked. "It is a little challenging," she admitted with a small smile. "Are you scared?" She paused. The honest answer would have been complicated. "A little nervous," she said. "But that is normal." The students seemed excited. "We will clap the loudest for you," one promised. Their simple support warmed her heart more than she expected. At home that evening, she practiced again. But this time, she did not only focus on the notes. She imagined the audience. She imagined the bright lights. She imagined the quiet before the first sound. Her hands trembled slightly at the thought. It had been many years since she stood in front of a crowd. Back then, stages were larger. The lights were stronger. The expectations were heavier. Applause once followed her everywhere. She stopped playing for a moment and stared at her reflection in the dark window. She barely recognized the person she used to be. "Why does this feel so big?" she whispered to herself. The next day, something unexpected happened. The principal announced that a local newspaper reporter would attend the cultural evening to write about the school's achievements. Suddenly, the event felt even more important. In the staff room, the pressure grew. "We cannot afford mistakes now," one teacher said. Another added, "Maybe we should have a backup plan." "A backup?" someone asked. "In case she gets stage fright." The words were not meant to hurt, but they did. She was sitting only a few chairs away. She kept her eyes on the papers in her hands, pretending not to hear. But inside, something tightened. Later that afternoon, the music teacher approached her privately. "Please don't misunderstand," he said carefully. "The school just wants everything to go smoothly." "I understand," she replied calmly. "Are you confident?" he asked. She looked at him directly for the first time. There was quiet strength in her eyes. "Yes," she said simply. That single word surprised him. Rehearsals continued every day. Each time, her performance remained steady. In fact, the more she played on that grand piano, the more comfortable she seemed. One evening, while she was finishing practice, the school cleaner stood at the back of the hall listening. When the final note faded, he slowly clapped. "That was beautiful," he said honestly. "It made me forget I was working." His simple words meant more to her than all the formal comments from the staff. Outside of rehearsals, she remained the same humble teacher. She helped students with homework. She stayed late to explain lessons. She never mentioned her skill unless someone asked directly. But inside, old memories were slowly returning. Memories of long hours in practice rooms. Memories of strict instructors correcting every tiny mistake. Memories of applause that once felt endless. She remembered the day she decided to step away from that world. It had not been an easy choice. Music had once been her entire identity. Leaving it behind felt like losing a part of herself. Yet life had changed her path. Now, standing at this small-town stage, she felt as if life was gently pushing her back toward something she had buried. A week before the event, a full dress rehearsal was scheduled. Students filled the hall to test the seating arrangement. Teachers moved around checking lights and sound. When it was her turn to play, the room was half full. The soft noise of students whispering created a different energy. She walked to the piano slowly. This time, her heart beat louder. She placed her fingers on the keys and began. For a moment, the whispers continued. Then, slowly, the sound of conversation faded. Students who had been distracted turned their heads toward the stage. The fast section arrived, and her hands flew across the keys with confidence. Even the students who normally struggled to sit still were watching in silence. When she finished, there was real applause. Not polite, not forced, real. The music teacher looked at the principal with raised eyebrows. The principal nodded quietly. After rehearsal, the same teachers who once doubted her now spoke differently. "I didn't realize she was that good," one admitted. "She must have had serious training," another said. "Still, She did not react to the change in tone. Praise did not excite her. Doubt did not break her. She stayed steady. That night at home, she did not practice for long. Instead, she sat quietly at the piano bench with her hands resting in her lap. She thought about why she agreed to perform in the first place. At first, it was simply to help the school. But now it felt like something more. Perhaps this was not only about one event. Perhaps it was about facing something she had avoided for years. The day before the cultural evening arrived faster than expected. The auditorium was fully decorated. Flowers were placed near the stage. The grand piano shone under the lights. She stood alone in the hall for a few minutes, looking at the empty seats. Tomorrow they would all be filled. She walked to the piano and pressed a single key. The sound echoed softly through the large room. Instead of fear, she felt calm. For the first time in many years, she was not running away from music. She was walking toward it. And though the teachers believed they had forced her to take this role, deep down she knew something different. Sometimes, life uses pressure to reveal what was never truly gone. Tomorrow night, when she sits under those bright lights, the school will see more than a temporary teacher. But they still have no idea how much more. The morning of the cultural evening arrived with a strange stillness. The school building looked the same from the outside, but inside, everything felt charged with quiet excitement. Teachers walked quickly through the halls. Students whispered about performances. Decorations were checked again and again. She arrived earlier than usual. The sky was still pale, and the air felt cool. She liked arriving before the noise began. It gave her time to think. As she unlocked her classroom, she paused for a moment. On her desk lay a small stack of essays waiting to be graded. Normal work. Ordinary responsibilities. It almost felt strange that tonight she would be on a stage instead of standing in front of a whiteboard. Throughout the day, students stopped by her desk. "Miss, don't forget we are sitting in the second row," one said proudly. "You will do great," another added. She smiled at each of them. Their belief felt pure. It did not come from expectations. It came from trust. By afternoon, rehearsals for other acts were underway. Singing, dancing, short speeches. Laughter echoed from the auditorium. She stayed away from the stage until it was necessary. Instead, she sat quietly in the empty music room. In that quiet space, memories slowly returned. She remembered being a little girl, her feet barely touching the floor as she sat on a tall piano bench. Her first teacher had strict eyes but kind hands. Again, the teacher would say whenever a mistake appeared, "Feel the music, don't just press the keys." As a child, she practiced for hours while other children played outside. Her fingers would ache, but she never complained. There was something about the piano that made her feel understood. By her teenage years, she had entered competitions. Large halls, bright lights, serious judges. She remembered the nervous silence before performances. She remembered how her heart would race, but the moment her fingers touched the keys, everything became clear. Applause once filled her world. Certificates and trophies lined shelves in her family home. Teachers called her gifted. Some even said she would become famous. But life does not always follow the path others expect. Years ago, when her family faced a deep personal loss, the piano began to feel heavy. Music that once brought joy started to carry pain. Every performance reminded her of someone who was no longer there to listen. Slowly, she stepped away from stages. Invitations were declined. Calls went unanswered. She told people she needed rest, but the truth was more complicated. She did not stop loving music. She just stopped sharing it. Instead, she chose a quieter life. Teaching gave her purpose without pressure. Helping students understand lessons felt meaningful in a different way. There were no bright lights, no judges, no loud applause, just small victories every day. Now, sitting in the music room, she realized tonight would be the first time in years that she would face an audience again. The school bell rang, bringing her back to the present. As evening approached, parents began arriving. The hallways filled with voices. Children dressed in neat clothes ran excitedly between classrooms. Teachers guided guests to their seats. She changed into a simple but elegant outfit. Nothing flashy, just something respectful for the stage. She tied her hair neatly and looked at herself in the mirror. "You are ready," she whispered softly. In the auditorium, the grand piano stood under a warm spotlight. Rows of chairs were now filled. The sound of quiet conversation created a gentle hum in the air. Backstage, she stood alone for a moment. The music teacher approached her. "Nervous?" he asked. "A little," she answered honestly. "You have practiced enough," he said. "Trust yourself." She nodded. The program began. One performance followed another. Applause rose and fell. She listened from behind the curtain, her breathing slow and steady. Finally, her name was announced. There was polite clapping as she walked toward the piano. Some in the audience did not know who she was. To them, she was simply a teacher filling in. She sat down on the bench and adjusted the sheet music, though she no longer needed to read it closely. For a brief second, she looked at the crowd. Faces blurred together under the lights. But in the second row, she saw her students smiling at her. She placed her fingers on the keys. The first note rang clear. At once, the hall felt different. Conversations stopped. The sound carried strength and emotion that surprised even those who had heard her rehearse. As the music continued, something shifted inside her. The nervousness slowly disappeared. Her body remembered what to do. Her hands moved with confidence. Difficult passages unfolded smoothly. She was not thinking about the audience anymore. She was not thinking about judgment. She was simply playing. The middle section, the most challenging part, arrived. Her fingers moved quickly across the keys, crossing and turning with precision. The sound filled every corner of the auditorium. The audience sat completely still. Teachers who once doubted her now leaned forward in their seats. The principal watched with wide eyes. Even the younger children seemed frozen in attention. The final section grew softer, more emotional. Each note carried feeling, not just skill. It was not a performance meant to impress. It was a story told through music. When the last note faded into silence, there was a brief pause. Then the applause came, started gently, then grew louder. People stood up from their seats. The sound echoed through the hall. She remained seated for a second, almost surprised. Slowly, she stood and gave a small bow. Under the bright lights, she did not look like a temporary teacher anymore. She looked like someone who had returned to where she truly belonged. As she walked off the stage, the music teacher met her with a look that held both admiration and disbelief. "You never told us," he said quietly. She smiled. "You never asked deeply," she replied gently. Backstage, a few teachers gathered around her. "That was incredible," one said. "Why didn't you say you were trained professionally?" another asked. She shrugged lightly. "It was a different chapter of my life." The principal approached last. "You brought honor to the school tonight," he said sincerely. She thanked him politely, but inside, she felt something more important than praise. She felt free. For years, she had hidden a part of herself. Not because she was ashamed, but because it carried too many memories. Tonight, she faced it again. And instead of pain, she felt peace. As the event continued, many guests approached her to express admiration. Some asked if she would perform again. Others asked where she had studied. She answered simply, without pride. Later, when the auditorium finally emptied and the lights dimmed, she walked back to the stage alone. The grand piano still stood in the center. She touched the smooth surface gently. For a long time, she believed that chapter of her life was over. But perhaps it was not about returning to fame or large halls. Perhaps it was about allowing herself to be whole again. The teachers had forced her onto the stage, thinking they were solving a problem. They did not know they were reopening a door she had quietly closed. Now that door stood open, and this time she was not afraid to walk through it. The night of the performance should have ended with applause and celebration, but for her, it felt like the beginning of something much deeper. After the audience slowly left and the decorations were taken down, she returned home with a quiet mind. The noise of clapping still echoed faintly in her ears, yet her apartment felt peaceful as always. She placed her bag on the chair and sat by the window. The street outside was calm. A few cars passed, their headlights briefly lighting up the walls. She did not turn on the television. She did not check her phone. She simply sat there, breathing slowly. For years she had avoided this feeling, the feeling of being seen. That evening she had not only played a difficult piece. She had allowed people to witness a part of her life she had carefully hidden. Felt strange, but not frightening anymore. The next morning, she expected everything to return to normal. She thought the school would move on to other matters. But when she arrived, she realized something had changed. Students were waiting near the entrance. "Miss, you were amazing," one shouted happily. "My parents kept talking about you all night," another said. She smiled, slightly embarrassed by the attention. "Thank you," she answered gently. In the staff room, the atmosphere was different too. Conversation stopped, but not in an awkward way. This time, there was respect in the silence. The principal walked toward her with a warm expression. "The newspaper published a short article about the event," he said, holding a folded page. "They mentioned your performance specifically." She looked surprised. "That was not necessary," she replied softly. "But it was deserved," he answered. She glanced at the article. The words described her playing as powerful and emotional. Reading it felt unreal. She had once been used to such comments, but now they felt distant, almost belonging to someone else. Throughout the day, teachers approached her one by one. "I misjudged you," one admitted honestly. "I thought it would be too difficult," another said with a small laugh. She did not hold any bitterness. "It is all right," she replied each time. "You did what you thought was best for the school." Still, she could sense something deeper in their reactions. It was not only surprise, it was realization. They had learned that quiet people can carry strong stories inside them. During lunch break, the music teacher joined her at a small table near the window. "You never told me you studied at such a high level," he said carefully. She stirred her tea before answering. "It was many years ago. Would you consider helping with the music program?" he asked. "The students could learn so much from you." She paused. The idea felt heavy but meaningful. "I will think about it," she said. After classes ended, she walked into the empty auditorium again. The chairs were stacked neatly now. The stage lights were off. The grand piano stood alone, silent. She walked up and sat at the bench without turning on the main lights. Only a small side lamp gave a soft glow. She pressed a single key. The sound echoed gently in the quiet hall. This time, she did not play the difficult performance piece. Instead, she played something simple and slow, a melody she used to play when she needed comfort. As her fingers moved, she realized something important. She had spent years thinking she needed to protect herself from music because it reminded her of loss. But maybe music was not the enemy. Maybe silence had been heavier than sound. Later that week, something unexpected happened. A shy student knocked on her classroom door after school. "Miss, can I ask something?" the student said softly. "Of course," she replied. "I want to learn piano, but I am scared. I think I am not talented." She looked at the student carefully. She recognized that fear. It was not about talent. It was about confidence. "Do you like music?" she asked gently. "Yes," the student answered. "Then that is enough to begin," she said with a reassuring smile. The student hesitated. "Were you always confident?" She thought for a moment. "No," she answered honestly. "Confidence grows slowly. It grows when you practice, and when you forgive yourself for mistakes." The student nodded thoughtfully. That short conversation stayed with her the whole evening. A few days later, the principal called her into his office. "We would like to officially offer you a permanent position," he said, "not only as a teacher, but also to help lead our music activities." She felt surprised. She had originally joined only for a short period. She had planned to move again once the term ended. "This is a big decision," she replied carefully. "We believe you can inspire the students," he added. Inspiration. That word touched her deeply. For years, She believed her role was to stay in the background. Now, life seemed to be asking her to step forward, but in a different way than before. Not for fame, not for applause, but for guidance. That night at home, she sat at her old upright piano once more. She played softly, thinking about the offer. She remembered the younger version of herself, full of ambition and dreams of large stages. She remembered the painful chapter that followed. And she looked at the present. Simple classroom walls, students with hopeful eyes, a small town that now saw her differently. Perhaps this was not a return to her old life. Perhaps it was the beginning of a new one. The next morning, she gave her answer. Yes, she told the principal calmly. I would like to stay. News spread quickly among the staff. Some seemed relieved. Others looked genuinely happy. The music teacher smiled widely. We have much work to do, he said with excitement. Soon, plans began forming for small group lessons, student recitals, and workshops. She helped design simple exercises for beginners. She encouraged students who felt unsure. She created a safe space where mistakes were allowed. And something beautiful started to grow. Students who once avoided the music room began visiting during breaks. Laughter replaced fear. The piano was no longer just an instrument for special events. It became part of daily life in the school. One afternoon, as she guided a small group through a simple melody, she noticed how carefully they watched her hands. She was not performing for applause anymore. She was sharing knowledge. And somehow that felt even more meaningful. The teachers who once pressured her to play now spoke about her with admiration. But she did not let praise change her behavior. She remained humble, steady, kind. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she would think about how everything began, with a sudden cancellation, a staff meeting full of worry, and a simple question about a hobby listed on a form. They thought they were forcing her to solve a problem. They did not know they were helping her find herself again. Life has strange ways of pushing people toward the places they need to be. If someone had told her months ago that she would stand on that stage again, she would not have believed it. But now, as she locked her classroom door at the end of another long day, she felt calm and certain. She was no longer hiding from her past. She was building something new from it. And this time, she was not playing for applause. She was playing for purpose. Weeks passed after the cultural evening, but the energy it created inside the school did not fade. Instead, it slowly grew into something steady and meaningful. The music room, once quiet and often unused, became one of the most active spaces in the building. She now spent part of her afternoons there, guiding students through simple exercises. At first, only a few joined. Some were curious. Others came because their friends convinced them. But slowly, more chairs filled. She never began with difficult pieces. She started with the basics. How to sit properly. How to relax the hands. How to listen carefully to each note. Music is not about speed, she would say gently. It is about feeling. The students listened closely. They were not afraid to make mistakes around her. If someone pressed the wrong key, she did not frown. She simply smiled and said, "Let us try again." One afternoon, the shy student who had first asked for help stayed behind after the lesson. "I practiced every day," the student said quietly. "But sometimes I still feel I am not good enough." She closed the piano lid softly and sat beside the student. "Do you know what makes someone truly good?" she asked. The student shook their head. "It is not talent alone. It is patience. And kindness toward yourself." The student looked thoughtful. "Were people always kind to you when you were learning?" She paused. "Not always," she answered honestly. "But I learned something important. Even if others are strict, you must not be cruel to yourself." Those words stayed in the air for a moment. Teaching felt different from performing. When she performed, she stood alone under bright lights. But here she was surrounded by growth. Small progress. Quiet victories. Soon, the school decided to organize a small student recital. Nothing grand. Just an opportunity for beginners to play short pieces in front of their families. When the announcement was made, some students looked excited. Others looked nervous. You do not have to join if you are not ready, she assured them. This is not about being perfect. It is about sharing what you learned. To her surprise, many signed up. In the staff room, teachers noticed the change in the students. They seem more confident lately, one commented. Yes, another agreed. Even in class, they speak up more. The principal smiled knowingly. Music teaches more than notes, he said. The day of the student recital arrived quietly. The auditorium was not fully packed like before, but enough parents came to fill the first several rows. She stood at the side of the stage, watching her students one by one. The first child walked up with trembling hands. The piece was simple, only a few lines long. But to that child it felt like climbing a mountain. When the final note sounded, the applause was warm and encouraging. She felt her heart fill with pride. One after another, students played. Some made small mistakes. Some forgot a note and paused. But none of them stopped completely. They kept going. When the shy student finally sat at the piano, the hall grew very quiet. She watched carefully from the side. The first notes were soft, slightly unsure. Then, slowly, the student found rhythm. Confidence grew with each measure. When the piece ended, the applause was louder than before. The student looked toward her with shining eyes. In that moment, she realized something powerful. This feeling was different from the applause she once received on large stages. That applause praised her skill. But this applause celebrated courage. After the recital, parents approached her. "Thank you for encouraging my child," one said. "I have never seen them this confident," another added. She listened humbly, always giving credit back to the students. "They did the hard work," she would say. But inside, she knew something else had happened. The teachers who once forced her to perform now saw her in a new light. Not just as a talented pianist, but as a mentor. One afternoon, while she organized sheet music, the music teacher entered the room. "You have changed this place," he said. She looked surprised. "I only shared what I know." "That is exactly what makes the difference," he replied. As weeks turned into months, the music program expanded. A small group began practicing after school regularly. Plans were made to participate in a regional student competition. When the idea was first mentioned, she felt a small fear return. Competitions reminded her of her past. The pressure, the expectations. But this time it was not about her. It was about giving students a chance to grow. She gathered the group and spoke honestly. "If we join, we do it for learning," she said. "Not for winning. Winning is never guaranteed. But improvement is always possible." The students agreed. During practice sessions, she shared stories from her own journey. Not about trophies or praise, but about hard days, about mistakes she once made, about times she wanted to quit. The students listened carefully. "You were scared too?" one asked in surprise. "Of course," she said with a gentle laugh. "Being scared does not mean you stop. It means you care." Her words carried weight because they were real. Meanwhile, the teachers who once doubted her often stopped by to listen to rehearsals. They no longer whispered. Instead, they encouraged. The principal sometimes stood quietly near the door, watching the students play with growing confidence. One evening, after a long practice session, she remained alone in the music room. The sunlight from the window painted soft shadows across the floor. She sat at the piano and began playing slowly. Not a performance piece, just something peaceful. As the notes filled the room, she reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. When she first agreed to perform, she felt pressured, almost cornered. She believed she was helping the school solve a problem. But now she understood something deeper. Sometimes others see strengths in us that we try to hide. If they had not insisted, she might still be avoiding the stage. She might still believe that chapter of her life was closed forever. Instead, she found a new purpose, not as a performer chasing applause, but as a guide helping others find their voice. A few days before the regional competition, the shy student approached her again. "I am still nervous," the student admitted. She smiled warmly. "That is good." "Good. Yes, it means you care about doing well. Just remember, No matter what happens, I am proud of you. The student's shoulders relaxed slightly. On the day of the competition, she stood in the audience, not on stage, watching her students step forward. When they played, she felt her heart beat fast, almost as if she were performing herself. They did not win first place, but they performed beautifully. On the ride back to school, the students were laughing and talking excitedly. We did our best, one said happily. Yes, she agreed softly. And that is enough. Back at school, the teachers congratulated the group. There was no disappointment, only pride. That evening, as she walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, she felt something settle peacefully inside her. The teachers once forced her to play a difficult piece, unaware of who she truly was. Now they fully understood. But more importantly, she understood herself again. Her talent was never meant to stay hidden. It was meant to be shared. And in sharing it, she had found something far greater than applause. She had found purpose, healing, and a new beginning. The school year slowly moved toward its final months, but the changes that began with one unexpected performance continued to grow. What started as a single evening on stage had turned into something that reshaped not only the music room, but the spirit of the whole school. She no longer felt like the quiet temporary teacher who stayed in the background. Yet she had not changed her nature. She still spoke gently. She still dressed simply. She still walked through the halls without seeking attention. The difference was not in how she acted. The difference was in how she felt. She felt steady. One afternoon, the principal invited her to attend a meeting with other schools in the district. They were discussing creative programs that helped students build confidence and emotional strength. We would like you to speak about what you have done here, the principal said. She looked surprised. I only taught music, she replied. You did more than that, he answered kindly. You helped students believe in themselves. She agreed to attend, though the idea of speaking in front of other educators made her slightly nervous. At the district meeting, she sat quietly at first, listening to others present detailed plans and reports. When her turn came, she stood slowly. She did not bring long papers or prepared speeches. She simply spoke from experience. I learned that students do not need pressure to grow, she said calmly. They need support. They need to know that mistakes are part of learning. When they feel safe, they surprise you. The room listened carefully. She shared how small recitals helped shy students gain courage, how group practice built friendship, how music became a space where students could express emotions they did not know how to speak about. When she finished, there was warm applause. But more meaningful than applause were the conversations that followed. Several educators approached her, asking how they could start similar programs in their own schools. On her way home that evening, she reflected on how different her life looked compared to a year ago. Back then, she avoided attention. Now, she accepted it when it served a purpose. Meanwhile, at school, her students continued to grow. The shy student who once doubted every note was now helping newer beginners find their hand position on the keys. Another student who struggled in academic classes found comfort and success in music practice. One day, during a quiet afternoon session, she asked the group a simple question. Why do you think music matters? The students thought for a moment. It makes me calm, one said. It helps me focus, another answered. It makes me brave, the shy student added. She smiled gently. Music cannot remove life's problems, she said softly, but it gives us strength to face them. As the final school event of the year approached, the principal asked if she would perform once more. This time, not because of an emergency, but as a planned part of the program. She paused before answering. This request felt different from the first time. Back then, she had felt pushed. Now she felt invited. Yes, she said. On the night of the event, the auditorium filled once again. But this time, she did not feel the same nervous energy in her chest. She felt calm anticipation. Her students were also performing short pieces that evening. She watched proudly from the side as they walked onto the stage with confidence that had not existed months ago. When her turn came, the introduction described her not only as a teacher, but as the founder of the school's growing music program. She walked toward the grand piano with steady steps. As she sat down, she looked briefly at the audience. In the front rows were students who once trembled at the thought of playing a single note in public. Now they smiled at her with admiration. She began to play. This time, the piece was not about technical difficulty. It was not chosen to impress. It was chosen because it carried warmth and hope. Each note flowed naturally. There was no tension in her shoulders. No fear of judgment. She played not as someone proving her talent. She played as someone at peace. When the final chord echoed through the hall, the applause rose again. But what touched her most was not the sound. It was the sight of her students standing proudly, clapping with bright eyes. After the event, parents and teachers gathered around her once more. But instead of speaking only about her skill, they spoke about the change they saw in their children. "My child is more confident now," one parent said. "They practice without being asked," another added. She listened with gratitude. Later, when the crowd had gone and the hall was quiet again, she remained alone on the stage for a moment. The grand piano stood under soft light. She remembered the first night she had been asked to perform. The doubt in the staff room, the whispers, the pressure. At that time, it felt uncomfortable. Now she understood something clearly. If they had not insisted, she might have continued hiding that part of herself forever. What felt like force in the beginning became a gift in the end. The following week, she received a letter. It was from a former music mentor who had heard about her recent performance through mutual contacts. The letter was simple. "I am glad you are playing again," it read. "The world needs people who use their talent to lift others." She held the letter carefully. For years, she believed stepping away from large stages meant leaving music behind. Now she realized something different. Music was never about the size of the stage. It was about the hearts it touched. As summer approached, she began planning next year's music curriculum. More beginner groups. More chances for students to perform in safe and supportive spaces. Workshops that combined music with storytelling. Her life no longer felt divided between past and present. Felt whole. One quiet afternoon before the holidays began, the shy student approached her one last time before leaving for the summer break. "Thank you," the student said softly. "For what?" she asked. "For making me brave." She felt her throat tighten slightly. "You made yourself brave," she replied gently. "I only reminded you that you could." As she locked the music room that day and walked down the empty hallway, sunlight streamed through the windows. She paused for a moment and listened. In the quiet building, she could almost hear faint echoes of piano notes, laughter, applause. What began as pressure had turned into purpose. What began as doubt had turned into respect. What began as a forced performance had turned into a new chapter filled with meaning. She stepped outside into the warm air, feeling calm and grateful. Sometimes, life pushes us toward doors we are afraid to open. But behind those doors, we may find the very part of ourselves we thought we had lost. And for her, the piano was no longer a reminder of pain or pressure. It was a bridge between past and present, between teacher and student, between fear and courage. She walked forward with quiet confidence, knowing that whatever stages awaited her in the future, she would no longer hide from them. Because now, she was not just a woman who could play beautifully. She was someone who helped others find their own music.